Every Nigerian above a certain age knows these three numbers: 65, 141, 97. They look like a padlock code. In a way, they are, because in January 2012, these three numbers locked an entire country. Planes stopped, banks closed, markets went silent. This is the story of how 65 became 141 overnight, and how ordinary Nigerians with placards and comedians and pure stubbornness dragged it back down to 97. To understand the war, you first need to understand the world of 65. For years, 1 liter of petrol in Nigeria cost 65 naira. Everybody knew the number the way you know your own phone number. It was one of the only stable things in the country. But that stability was artificial. Bringing 1 liter of petrol into Nigeria actually cost more than double of that. The government quietly paid the difference. That payment is what is called the fuel subsidy. And here is the absurd part. Nigeria pumps oil for a living, one of the biggest producers on the continent. Yet, our refineries barely worked, so we shipped our own crude abroad and bought it back as petrol, like selling your yam farm, then buying pounded yam at restaurant price. Why does petrol matter so much? Because in Nigeria, petrol matters in everything. The bus fare to work, the generator humming behind every shop when NEPA takes the light, the truck that carries tomatoes from Kano to Lagos. Touch the fuel price and you have touched the price of life itself. Now, the government had a case. The subsidy was swallowing trillions of naira. The central bank governor went on the BBC and called it unsustainable. About $8 billion in 1 year. Their argument was simple. Remove it and all that money becomes roads, hospitals, power. To a population that watched all the money disappear for 50 years, those two words landed like a joke with no punchline. Still, the government promised there would be consultation first. Labor unions were told nothing would happen before April. There was time to talk. There was no time to talk. January 1st, 2012, the New Year's Day, millions of Nigerians were far from home, resting in their villages after the holidays, pockets already empty from the Christmas. That morning, a government agency released a short statement. The subsidy was gone, effective immediately. Petrol went from 65 naira to 141 overnight, and that was the official price. In some states, marketers sold it for 150, 200, even 250. Imagine standing at a motor park in the village, ready to travel back to Lagos, and the fare has doubled while you slept. That was the New Year gift. Happy New Year. The shock lasted about 1 day, then the shock turned into something else. January 2nd, protests broke out, small at first. Petrol stations shut down by hungry crowds, human chains across motorways. And then Nigeria did something it had never quite done before. It organized. Online, Twitter, Facebook. One protest group opened on Facebook and had 20,000 members within a week. The world had just watched Occupy Wall Street. Nigerians borrowed the name and made it theirs. Occupy Nigeria. Then came January 3rd, Ilorin, Kwara State. A young man named Muhyiddin Mustafa was killed at a protest. He was 23 years old. Reports said the police shot him. The police said otherwise. His family buried him the next day. The movement now had its first name to carry. By the end of that week, the labor unions had seen enough. They gave the government an ultimatum. And it was not subtle. Reverse this, or from Monday the 9th, we shut down Nigeria. Offices, airports, seaports, banks, everything. Monday, January 9th, Nigeria switched off. No flights, no banks, no markets. Even oil workers threatened to stop the pumps, the one thing that pays for the whole country. The busiest, loudest nation in Africa went quiet, except for one place, a place in Lagos, Gani Fawehinmi Park, Ojota, named after the lawyer who spent his life suing the government. Fitting, because that park became the beating heart of the whole thing. Crowds in the hundreds of thousands, people trekked for miles from their neighborhoods just to stand there. And being Nigerians, we could not protest without turning it into a show. Musicians performed, comedians took the stage between speeches, food sellers moved through the crowd doing bricks business. If you watched our last episode, you already understand this. We are a people who organize joy. Even our revolution resembled an Owambe, hungry Owambe, but Owambe. In Kano, protesters occupied a square and slept there, night after night in January Harmattan cold. And then, photos began to spread that nobody could stop sharing. Christians standing guard in a ring around Muslims while they prayed at the protest ground. Then Muslims returning the favor on Sunday. A country that is always told it is divided looked at those photos and saw something it rarely sees, itself on the same side. The government started to sweat. The president announced a committee to watch over the subsidy savings. Then he cut his own officials' pay by a quarter. The streets looked at the offer and said, "Thank you, we are still here." The strike entered a second week. Then came Monday, January 16th. Two things happened that morning, and the other matters. First, soldiers moved into the streets of Lagos, armored vehicles at the protest grounds. The message did not need translation. Second, the president addressed the nation. The price would come down. Nothing like 65, but down 97 naira. The labor union took the deal and suspended the strike. And just like that, after 2 weeks, Nigeria switched back on. So, who won? Depends on who you ask. The government kept part of the increase. The streets kept part of the subsidy. Many protesters felt the union settled too cheap, that the crowd at Ojota had more to give. But something had been proven that January. For one moment, tribe did not matter, religion did not matter, and the government looked out of the window and blinked. The streets had moved the price of petrol. That had never happened on this scale before, and everybody knew it. Now, you would think the story ends there. The story does not end there. Because how that anger forced the National Assembly to finally open the subsidy books. A committee was set up to investigate where the subsidy money had actually been going. What they found was worse than the streets had imagined. Billions of dollars paid out for fuel that never arrived. Companies collecting subsidy money for ships that existed only on paper. The chairman of that committee became a national hero, the man auditing the thieves. Then a billionaire oil magnate quietly reported something to the secret police. The committee chairman, he said, had demanded a $3 million bribe to remove his company from the report. The DSS marked the currency, hid a camera in the businessman's living room, and pressed record. On tape, the man auditing the thieves collected $500,000. Then the company's name came off the list. It took 9 years in court. In 2021, he was convicted and sent to prison. And in 2025, he received a presidential pardon. I will just leave that there. Which brings us to the final twist, and it is the quietest one. May 29, 2023, 11 years later, a new president stands at its own inauguration. A man who back in January 2012 had personally addressed the Occupy crowds in Lagos, standing with the protesters against subsidy removal. In his speech, he says 3 words: subsidy is gone. Within weeks, petrol roughly tripled. And this time, there was no Ojota, no 2-week shutdown. A tired country grumbled, adjusted, and kept moving. There was no 97 this time. 65, 141, 97. Three numbers from the 1 January when the street moved the price. Whether that January can ever happen again, that is a question I cannot answer for you. But I know this. Somewhere in Lagos, there is a park named after a stubborn lawyer, and for 2 weeks in 2012, it was the loudest place on earth. Next time, the 70s, oil money was falling on Nigeria like rain, so we did the most Nigerian thing possible. We invited the entire black world to one gigantic party in Lagos, 17,000 guests, 1 full month, and the guest of honor was locked in a glass case in London. Come and hear it.